Gustavo Fring. Gustavo Fring's death came as the result of Hector Salamanca's carefully planned revenge, carried out with the help of Walter White. A bomb was secretly planted inside Hector's wheelchair, waiting for the perfect moment when Gus arrived to visit him at the nursing home. When Gus entered the room, everything seemed calm, but the tension was impossible to ignore. He approached Hector and spoke in his usual cold, composed manner, while Hector responded with nothing but a look of pure hatred. On the surface, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, without warning, Hector began repeatedly ringing the bell on his wheelchair, a signal. A massive explosion ripped through the room. The blast shattered the silence, tearing apart the room and critically injuring everyone inside. What made the scene truly unforgettable was what happened next. Gus calmly walked out of the room. At first glance, he appeared completely unharmed, even adjusting his tie as though nothing had happened. But a few seconds later, the horrifying truth became clear. The explosion had completely destroyed the right side of his body. Despite remaining on his feet for a brief moment, the devastating injuries finally caught up with him, and he collapsed dead. Glenn Rhee. Glenn Rhee's death in The Walking Dead came after he and the rest of his group were captured by Negan. Forced to kneel in a line, they had no idea who would be chosen as the next victim. The atmosphere was eerily quiet, broken only by Negan's footsteps and the sound of his barbed wire baseball bat. After the first victim fell, the tension was already unbearable. But the nightmare was far from over. Glenn, who had survived the first round, suddenly reacted after seeing his friend badly injured. That split-second movement immediately caught Negan's attention. Without another word, Negan swung his bat straight into Glenn's head. Glenn collapsed to the ground but still struggled to get back up. Even though he was already critically injured, he managed to look toward the people closest to him. It was a heartbreaking moment because he remained conscious, despite having no way to fight back. Negan then continued the beating, striking Glenn over and over again. With every blow, Glenn's condition grew worse, while the rest of the group could do nothing but watch. There was no rescue, no pause, just one brutal strike after another. What made the scene even more disturbing was the focus on Glenn's fading expressions as he slowly succumbed to his injuries. Oberyn Martell. Oberyn Martell's death in Game of Thrones came during his legendary duel against Gregor Clegane, becoming one of the most shocking and brutal moments in the entire series. From the very beginning, Oberyn had the upper hand. He circled around Gregor with incredible speed, landing quick spear strikes again and again. His spear was coated with poison, making every wound even more deadly. Meanwhile, Gregor relied on his immense size and brute strength, but struggled to keep up with Oberyn's agility. Instead of ending the fight, however, Oberyn kept pressing forward, while demanding that Gregor confess to his past crimes. That decision slowed the pace of the battle, and it proved to be a fatal mistake. The moment Oberyn got too close, Gregor suddenly grabbed him and slammed him to the ground. In an instant, the fight completely turned around. The man who had dominated the entire duel was now trapped beneath an opponent far bigger and stronger. Gregor pinned Oberyn down, leaving him with no chance to escape. Even then, Oberyn struggled to fight back, but Gregor's overwhelming strength was simply too much. The fight reached its horrifying end when Gregor crushed Oberyn's skull with his bare hands. What made the scene even more disturbing was how little the camera held back. There were no quick cuts to soften the impact. Within seconds, the duel ended in one of the most brutal deaths in the series, leaving viewers completely stunned. Black Noir. Black Noir's death in The Boys came at the hands of the one person he had always stood beside, Homelander. It was revealed that Black Noir shared a complicated history with both Homelander and Soldier Boy. As Homelander searched for the truth about his own origins, he turned to Noir, believing that the person who had been with him the longest would finally give him an honest answer. Instead, Homelander learned that Noir had known the truth all along, but chose to keep it hidden. The moment that secret came to light, the atmosphere instantly shifted. Homelander felt betrayed, not by an enemy, but by someone he had trusted for years. Without warning, Homelander snapped. In a sudden burst of rage, he drove his hand straight through Black Noir's abdomen, delivering a brutal killing blow. Noir never had the chance to defend himself. His body immediately went limp after the attack. What made the moment so shocking was how quickly it happened. There was no drawn-out fight, just one sudden act of overwhelming violence that ended his life in an instant. William Wallace. William Wallace's death came at the end of Braveheart, after he was betrayed by Scottish nobles and captured by the forces of King Edward I. He was taken to London to stand trial for treason against the English crown. Although he was promised mercy if he pledged his loyalty to the king, Wallace refused to submit. Before a massive crowd, Wallace was bound to the execution platform. The executioners then carried out his sentence, subjecting him to relentless torture. He was beaten and forced to endure unimaginable pain, yet he refused to confess or beg for mercy. As his body became covered in wounds, the royal officials repeatedly demanded that he surrender and swear loyalty to the English king. As the torture intensified, Wallace's strength slowly began to fade. Even through the unbearable pain, he never abandoned his convictions. Princess Isabel, watching from a distance, could do nothing but witness his suffering. When the officials gave him one final chance to beg for mercy and end his agony, Wallace gathered the last of his strength. With every ounce of breath he had left, he shouted a single word: "Freedom!" It was his final act of defiance against English rule. His cry echoed across the crowd, becoming a lasting symbol of Scotland's fight for independence. Moments later, the execution was finally carried out. Wallace succumbed to his injuries, and his body fell still. The crowd, which had mocked him only moments before, gradually fell silent after witnessing the courage he showed in facing death without ever betraying his beliefs. William Wallace's death became the emotional climax of Braveheart. Although his life ended on the execution platform, his sacrifice inspired the people of Scotland to continue their fight for freedom. Severus Snape. Severus Snape's death came during the Battle of Hogwarts, as the war between Lord Voldemort's forces and the defenders of Hogwarts reached its final stage. By that point, Voldemort believed Snape had become the true master of the Elder Wand after Albus Dumbledore's death. Convinced that the wand's loyalty would only pass to him if Snape died, Voldemort decided to kill him. Snape was summoned to the boathouse near Hogwarts. The room was dark, littered with broken glass, while the sounds of the battle echoed in the distance. Voldemort calmly explained his belief about the Elder Wand, leaving Snape little time to react. Nearby stood Nagini, Voldemort's loyal snake. Rather than killing Snape with his own wand, Voldemort chose a different method. He ordered Nagini to attack. Within seconds, Nagini lunged forward and repeatedly bit Snape in the neck through an opening in the magical barrier. The attack sent Snape collapsing to the floor as blood poured from his wounds. Believing the job was finished, Voldemort turned and walked away, certain that Snape would soon die. Moments later, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger entered the boathouse. They found Snape barely alive. Harry cautiously approached him, having spent years believing Snape was his enemy. With his final moments slipping away, Snape asked Harry to collect the tears falling from his eyes. Those tears contained his memories, revealing the truth about Lily Potter, and the real reason he had protected Harry all those years. Snape's death completely changed Harry's understanding of the man he had hated for so long. Through those memories, Harry finally learned that Snape had spent years risking his life as a double agent, secretly working against Voldemort the entire time. Joel Miller. Joel Miller's death became the defining moment of The Last of Us Part 2. It all began while Joel and his brother, Tommy, were out on patrol near Jackson. During their patrol, they came across a young woman named Abby Anderson, who was being chased by a horde of infected. Joel and Tommy helped Abby fight them off. The three of them escaped to a nearby lodge, where Abby's group had taken shelter from the snowstorm. Unaware of who they really were, Joel and Tommy followed her inside. The atmosphere shifted the moment Tommy introduced them by name, immediately catching the attention of everyone in the room. Everything suddenly became tense. Abby finally realized that the man standing before her was Joel Miller, the person she had spent years searching for. Without hesitation, she grabbed a shotgun and fired directly into Joel's leg at point-blank range. The blast shattered his leg, sending him crashing to the floor in agony. Tommy was quickly overpowered and restrained by Abby's companions, including Manny Alvarez, Nora Harris, and the others. Joel lay helpless on the floor, unable to stand, as blood continued pouring from his wound. Abby slowly approached him, gripping a golf club. She then began beating Joel over and over again. Every swing landed on his body and head, while he was no longer capable of fighting back. The others simply watched or guarded the room, making sure no one could interfere. Moments later, Ellie Williams finally arrived at the lodge. She found Joel lying on the floor, already in critical condition. Desperate to save him, Ellie screamed and begged Abby to stop. But two members of Abby's group pinned Ellie to the ground, leaving her powerless to help. By then, Joel could barely move after enduring the relentless beating. Abby stepped forward one last time and brought the golf club down on Joel's head, delivering the final blow that ended his life. Davy Jones. Davy Jones's death came at the end of Pirates of the Caribbean. At World's End, during the epic battle between the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman in the middle of a massive maelstrom. The battle unfolded in the heart of a violent storm. The sea twisted into a gigantic whirlpool as cannons fired at point-blank range. Ship masts snapped apart, and crew members were thrown into the raging ocean. On the deck of the Flying Dutchman, Davy Jones fought with relentless force, attacking with both his sword and the writhing tentacles covering his face. Despite the chaos, He remained nearly unstoppable because his heart was hidden inside the dead man's chest. Amid the destruction, Will Turner confronted Jones in a sword fight atop the ship's tilted mast as it swayed violently above the whirlpool. Their blades clashed again and again while the ship lurched beneath them. Jones kept the pressure on with a relentless barrage of attacks. Then, in one decisive moment, he drove his sword straight through Will's chest. The wound was fatal. Will collapsed immediately, struggling to breathe as blood spilled from his mouth. At the same time, Jack Sparrow managed to seize the dead man's chest containing Davy Jones's heart. Jones instantly realized what was happening and rushed to stop him, cutting down anyone who stood in his way. At first, Jack intended to stab the heart himself and become the new captain of the Flying Dutchman, but after seeing Will on the verge of death, he made a different choice. Jack placed the knife in Will's hand and guided it into Davy Jones's heart. The moment the blade pierced the heart marked the end of Davy Jones. His body reacted instantly. He froze in place, staring downward in complete shock as his heart beat a few final times before bursting apart. Jones slowly began to lose his balance. As the Flying Dutchman continued to break apart in the storm, Jones staggered toward the edge of the deck. The tentacles on his face twitched uncontrollably. After one final glance toward the sky, he fell backward off the ship, disappearing into the giant whirlpool as his body slowly sank beneath the sea.